Chinese stocks are falling after Donald Trump wins the U.S. elections. Vietnam is ramping up artificial island building in the South China Sea, and a Philippine military drill focuses on liberated occupied islands in plain view of the Chinese military. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Now, you probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of. And you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. So, what does the Chinese Communist Party think about this? Doesn't care. At least that's the official story. The official response to the election results were formulaic. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said, "Our policy towards the U.S. is consistent. We will continue to view and handle China-U.S. relations in accordance with the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation." Which makes sense. I mean, what else are they going to say? That they wish he'd lost and that he's a horrible, terrible meanie? Not MSNBC. Besides, that would probably end about as well as it ultimately did for the Democrats. But unofficially, some are telling National Taiwan University said that everyone he was speaking with was talking about the election. He told Fox News Digital that Trump's victory is a worst-case scenario for Beijing. Relations between Washington and the CCP are already strained, and Trump has vowed to impose heavier tariffs on China. Many of the Trump administration's policies towards China remained in place during the Biden administration, because even Sleepy Joe was alert enough to see China's threat. But this time around, the philosophy professor says China knows how much such policies will hurt, and they will come at a time when China's domestic economy is not doing well, which is a bit of an understatement. China's economy is an absolute dumpster fire on wheels, and Canada, the US, and many European countries are already placing tariffs on Chinese EV imports and other goods after accusing China of dumping on the market. But China doesn't care that Trump won. Just look at how not nervous she looks. We'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out for China. Or maybe not, because major US-listed Chinese stocks are already falling after Trump's win, with his tariff promises in the spotlight. Shares of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba fell by as much as 4.5%, while JD.com fell by 7.7%, and Bilibili stock fell by 7.8%. Call those stocks Tom Petty, because they're free-falling. Meanwhile, as the final results of the election started coming in, the Hong Kong Sung Index dropped 2.2%, and the Shanghai Composite Index fell by 0.1%. This may have something to do with the 10 to 20% tariffs across the board that Trump has suggested imposing, with 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. A 60% tariff on Chinese goods could reduce Chinese GDP growth by 2.4 percentage points, according to Citi analysts. And given that China's official GDP growth numbers are already just barely hanging on, with the actual numbers probably being far lower, that could be a serious blow to China. Of course, those same analysts believe that threat is going to be used as a bargaining chip by Trump rather than actually implemented. Which makes sense, it's a gamble. You can take the man out of the casinos, but you can't take the casinos out of the man, especially when his name is on it. Of course, the stock market being the stock market, the panic eased up in the days after the election and several of the stocks rebounded. So I guess we're back to, we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. A Taiwanese couple has been indicted for being paid by the CCP to spread their propaganda and influence elections. The couple were charged with violating Taiwan's Anti-Infiltration Act and election laws by making radio and digital media propaganda for Beijing in exchange for $2.32 million paid out over more than a decade. They're both members of a small political party on the island called the CUPP, the China Unification Promotion Party, which is pretty self-explanatory. The party only has about 60,000 members. But the indictment is actually pretty significant because Taipei, in the past, has struggled to connect Chinese cash payouts to the CUPP, which indicates that the 2020 Anti-Infiltration Act has changed things. The Investigation Bureau of Taiwan's Ministry of Justice said in a statement Monday that authorities investigating the couple searched 24 locations between December 2023 China's Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing and its branch office in Fujian Province paid the couple between 2011 and 2023. I guess it's nice to see, given the state of China's economy, that Beijing is able to offer steady income to somebody. And what did they do in exchange? Well, allegedly they promoted candidates favored by Beijing, disparaged Hong Kong democracy activists and members of Falun Gong, boasted about China's military power, and urged Taiwan's troops to surrender in the event of a Chinese invasion. So they were shills. I hope China gives them some commemorative swag. I sold out my country, and all I got was some money, a prison sentence, and this poorly made t-shirt. Prosecutors also allege the couple went to mainland China several times to provide program summaries and plans for CCP authorities to review. China hasn't commented on the arrest, but the husband says Taiwan says it's democratic, but it's not democratic at all. The CUPP has always been championing cross-strait reunification, so what I said is the same as what the CUPP has always advocated. True, but when you say it for payments to the tune of $2.3 million, it's just a little bit different. And after the break, Vietnam and the Philippines are getting tough on China. Welcome back. Vietnam is taking a harsher stance on Chinese aggression by demanding Beijing return detained Vietnamese fishermen and ramping up island building. Vietnam claims that a number of Vietnamese fishermen have been detained by China near the Paracel Islands for quote-unquote illegal fishing, although they haven't said when the fishermen were detained or how many they were. And last week, the deputy spokesperson for Vietnam's Foreign Affairs Ministry called on China to release them. At a news conference on Halloween, he said Vietnam resolutely opposes China's actions and requests China to fully respect Vietnam's rights over the Paracel Islands, release all illegally detained Vietnamese fishermen and vessels, compensate for damage, and stop and not the harassment and illegal capture of Vietnamese vessels and fishermen. The disputed Paracel Islands are claimed by Vietnam but have been occupied by China since 1974. China, of course, disputes Vietnam's version of events. I assume China's version is, we, as always, did nothing wrong. Quit hating, haters. China and Vietnam have a testy relationship historically, going back to a Chinese invasion of its southern neighbor back in 1979 that didn't end too well for the CCP. China had a bad time invading Vietnam? Man, they've been copying the US for decades. But the CCP might find it much more difficult to bully Vietnamese fishermen now than they did in the past, because Vietnam is ramping up construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea. Analysts are suggesting this could lead to a militarization of the area, with an airfield even being built on the Bark Canada Reef. Neither country is commenting much on the issue at the time, and it's likely going to take much longer before Vietnam's efforts could match those of China's militarized islands in the South China Sea. But this could eventually allow Vietnam to counter China's attempts to claim waters in its territory, especially since the CCP has its handful dealing with Taiwan and the Philippines. Man, China's making so many enemies, they can't keep track of their enemies. They're spread thinner than Xi's skin when he sees this image. Seriously, don't share it. It makes him real mad. Philippine forces have retaken an island in mock combat right in front of the Chinese Navy. This was the first such exercise of its kind and showed off Philippine military capabilities as Chinese warships nearby watched on. General Romeo Bronner Jr. observed the drills from a frigate and underscored how the exercise displayed the readiness of the Philippine forces. Bronner told a small group of journalists who were invited to see the exercises that we are warning our neighbors, or whoever, or any external forces, that we are capable of defending our islands. Bronner has even said that the Chinese ships nearby added realism to the exercise, as if Filipino ships hadn't already had enough realistic encounters with Chinese boats. The Philippines and China have been clashing for a long time over disputed islands and waters in the South China Sea. And the U.S. has repeatedly warned the CCP that it is obligated by treaty to defend the Philippines should tensions escalate into war. Chinese officials have not commented on this drill, but in the past, they've opposed war drills entirely in the South China Sea, unless, of course, the People's Liberation Army Navy is the one conducting them. The head of Myanmar's military government is visiting China for the first time since taking power. This is the first time in over 3 years that Myanmar's junta chief has traveled to China, and he's due to visit the city of Kunming, which is not far from the Myanmar border, for a series of talks and summits on regional economic cooperation, according to a report from state-run TV. Now, the report said he will also have meetings with Chinese government officials to discuss ways to enhance goodwill, economic and various sectors between the two governments and the people. Because who would know more about improving economies than China? Everybody. The answer is everybody. Myanmar is in a devastating civil war, and the military junta has recently faced a series of losses. China's been backing both sides, though, through different measures, which we've covered on the show before. So opposition groups in Myanmar have expressed their concern about China hosting the junta chief, since the junta is sanctioned by many Western nations for human rights abuses. Not that China would ever listen to concerns about human rights abuses, but Beijing has been concerned about potential spillovers of the violence from both sides and has failed to broker a ceasefire numerous times. But now the CCP wants to make its concerns heard loud and clear, including by shutting down borders and cutting electricity to Myanmar towns, among other measures. Wow, so she does care. Now I've got a video I want to show you that you're going to love. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phone, there are tons of companies that are collecting your personal data. I'm talking names, social security number, home address, employment history, all sorts of things you might not want to be public knowledge. When I signed up for Incogni in 2022, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. This was terrifying. So what did I do? I've been getting as many of these companies as possible to delete my data from their systems, and I did it using Incogni. You can too. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 357 of these data brokers who've collected my info, and I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So get Incogni for yourself and reclaim your own data. Go to incogni.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. And before YouTube's algorithm sends you off to some random video, check out this video from my show Deep Thoughts While Gaming about the murder of Peanut the Squirrel and the Second Amendment right to bear arms in the game Squirrel with a Gun. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.